Amid rising tension in the Middle East, the world is worried about a tiny place on the map. A narrow waterway just 33 kilometers wide. But if it gets blocked, one-fifth of the world's oil supply could stop overnight. Fuel prices would surge, economies could slow down. That tiny geographic choke point is called the Strait of Hormuz. It may look like a small waterway on the map, but geographically it is one of the most powerful choke points on Earth. Every single day, around 20 million barrels of oil passes through this narrow strait, roughly one-fifth of the world's oil supply. That oil comes mainly from the countries around the Persian Gulf such as Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, Iran and the United Arab Emirates. For many of these countries, almost all their oil export must pass through this single route to reach global market. In other words, a narrow stretch of water controls the energy supply of the modern world. And that is exactly why the Strait of Hormuz is one of the most sensitive geopolitical hotspots on Earth. In recent months, tension in the Middle East have sharply increased.
A short time ago, the United States military began major combat operations in Iran.
After military strike and escalating conflict involving Iran, several oil tankers were attacked and shipping companies temporarily stopped sending vessels through the strait. But what would happen if the Strait of Hormuz was completely blocked? To understand that, we must look at which countries depend on this route the most. The first shock would be felt by countries that depend heavily on imported oil. Take India for example. India imports nearly 85% of oil it consumes, and a large share of that oil comes from Gulf countries like Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait and the United Arab Emirates. If the Strait of Hormuz suddenly shut down, fuel supply would tighten almost immediately. Petrol and diesel prices would surge, transportation costs would rise, industries that rely on oil would slow down, and once fuel becomes expensive, everything else becomes expensive too. The same problem would hit countries like Japan, which imports almost 90% of its oil, mostly from the Middle East. The next major impact would be on China, the world's largest oil importer. China imports around 10 million barrels of oil every day, and a large portion of that oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz. In fact, during the recent tension, Iran indicated that Chinese ships might still be allowed to pass through the strait, while others could face restrictions. But the impact would not stop with oil importing countries. Even the countries selling the oil would suffer. Take Saudi Arabia for example. A large portion of its oil export must pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Saudi Arabia does have a pipeline that carries oil to the Red Sea, allowing some exports to bypass the strait. But this pipeline cannot handle the full volume of the Saudi oil export. Similarly, the United Arab Emirates too has a pipeline but cannot replace the massive amount of oil that normally flows through the Hormuz every day. Countries like Pakistan would also face rising fuel price and energy shortage because most of the imported oil comes from Gulf countries that rely on this route. If the Strait of Hormuz were blocked completely, oil prices would surge dramatically, shipping costs would rise, inflation would increase worldwide, the world could face a major economic slowdown. And all of this because of a 33-kilometer stretch of water. This story is not just about oil or politics, it is about geography. Mountains, rivers, and ocean often decide the fate of nation. And sometimes, the most powerful place on earth is not a city or a country, but a narrow strip of water. The Strait of Hormuz is proof of that.